All right, this is section 5.4, rational equations, specifically solving rational equations. First, we need to know what a ratio is, since that's where the word rational comes from. So there's different ways of writing this. The A with the double dots here. Sometimes you see this in gambling, or you'll see this, A to B. This is actually the old sign for division. The new one, they've just put a line through it, through the middle of it, to make the division sign for arithmetic. But in algebra, we usually write it A over B. It's just clearer, easier to work with. So that's what a ratio is. A proportion is a ratio equal to a ratio. Okay, so some people don't know the difference between these two words. I guess in common English, there's sometimes, in some situations, they're used interchangeably, but in math, we have to have a specific meaning. So this is a fraction equal to a fraction, just like this. Not a fraction equal to a fraction plus something else. Just a fraction equal to a fraction. That's a proportion. Okay? So we solve these proportions by clearing the fractions, which in the case of equations means multiplying both sides of the equation by the common denominator, and we usually use the least common denominator because we don't want the numbers bigger than necessary, right? So here's an example. Okay, now this is the same as it works with just numbers. It works exactly the same way, because remember, 2x plus 3 is just a real number, and 4x minus 5 is just a real number. Okay, so my least common denominator for this one happens to be the product of the two, because they don't have any common factors other than 1, or possibly minus 1, which we don't care about here. So we just have to multiply both sides of the equation by the product of those two denominators, the two binomials, right? So I just wrote down what it is so that I make sure I multiply both sides of the equation by that. Okay, so I just write it in. And if this is new to you, write it exactly like this. Don't make up your own way of writing things if you don't know what you're doing. If you're real comfortable with it, well then, if you can write something that actually makes sense, where you could show it to a classmate and they would know what you were doing, then it's fine. But I've been looking at some of your work recently, and some of you are not really writing anything down correctly, and that's going to make learning math much more difficult than it needs to be. So anyway, so this is what I've done. I've taken the two original ones, which I left in this kind of fleshy color, and multiplied both sides by the LCD, the least common denominator, which happens to be the product of the two denominators in this case. And then factors cancel. That's why we used a common factor, right? And then I have to distribute the 8 and distribute the 9. And why am I doing that? So that I can collect all of the terms on one side of the equation and combine similar terms, right? AKA like terms. So that's why I rewrote it just because it was kind of messy looking. So I rewrote it very carefully, making sure that I wrote down everything that's left. Sometimes people miss a factor because it gets messy. This one's not too bad though. And distribute the 8. We get 32x minus 40 equals 18x plus 27. Just make sure you distribute it all the way across on each one. The 8 and the 9. Then what did I do? I subtracted the 18x from both sides. In other words, move the 18x to the left and make it negative, and combine it with the 32x, and you get 14x. 32 minus 18 is 14. And then added the 40 to both sides, right? And I got 67 on the right. And then you just cross multiply, basically. You just divide both sides by 14. Like so. And I got 67/14. And then I should take that and put it in the original equation right here and make sure it works. If you did all the algebra right, it should work. But sometimes you do all the algebra right, and when you plug in this denominator or this answer, you end up with a 0 in the denominator. And so you'd have to cross it off. And if you only had one answer like this, you'd cross it off and say no solution, right? Sometimes with these, you might have two answers, and then you just cross off. You know, if there's one that doesn't work, you cross it off. If neither one works, cross both off. And if they both work, then you keep both. So it's very, very important that you plug your answers in to see if they actually work. And just do the left side, calculate it. Use a calculator if you want. No big deal, right? And then do the right side of the equation and calculate it. And see if they're the same.